Okay, I assume everybody can see this. So when Jishwan asked the question of why does the United States lose so many wars, it reminded me of Vladimir Lefebvre's theory of two systems of ethical cognition, where in one, the idea, it's concerned with means and ends. And the notion is that there are two systems of ethical cognition that exist in the world. You learn it as a young person and you carry that with you throughout your entire life, unless you happen to learn the other ethical system, and then you have a choice. You can choose which ethical system you use in any particular circumstance. And I have tried this, it works, it's quite interesting. People in multiple countries find this interesting as well. And I think this theory made a major contribution to ending the Cold War, because it helped Russians and Americans learn how the other side was thinking, and we're no longer trapped by the ethical system that they had learned growing up. So this theory comes from Vladimir Lefebvre. He was a mathematician and psychologist in Moscow. He worked on strategic planning. He was asked to think about strategic planning and in a warfare situation where the idea was to think about what the other side is doing and what does the other side know about what we're doing and what do we know about what they're doing and so forth. And so he developed a sort of mathematics based on a variation of Boolean algebra. It's a kind of hierarchical mathematics. I won't go into it. But in any case, so the result of that was that there are two systems of ethical cognition, and some people use one, some people use the other. People who are familiar with both of them can choose which one to use in any particular circumstance. So in the first ethical system, which he said characterized the West, he did this work back in the 80s. The end does not justify the means. This is civilian ethics. You do not kill people. And even in war, there are some things you do not do, such as kill civilians. In the second ethical system, on the other hand, the end justifies the means. If you're fighting a war, the whole idea is to win. This is military ethics. Killing is necessary. And in war, victory requires killing. And if you lose a war, obviously the consequences are dramatic. So you don't want to lose a war. Next slide. Okay, so more on this. Why does the United States seem to lose a lot of wars? Well, maybe they're not really trying to win wars. That is, they may be trying to help other countries move toward democracy and the rule of law. The US supports ideals beyond its immediate self-interest. It doesn't feel that its self-interests are severely at stake. You may be fighting a war on somebody else's territory, like Vietnam or Iraq or someplace like that. So if a war becomes too costly, just build a wall and wait for tempers to cool, as in the case of Korea or between East and West Europe. However, in the second ethical system, where it's all or nothing, it's your own home country, you're fighting for the life of your people, it's a different set of ethics, and the US should not get involved in other countries. The US should not attempt to do nation building, and you fight to the death. Okay, then one more. Next one. So if you're using the first ethical system and the wars or the fighting has stopped, you seek to reunite with former enemies. Like in the US Civil War, the North and the South tried to get together. They're still working on it. East and West Germany have gotten together. The US and Japan are now allies. However, if victory is not possible, then you may decide the best alternative is just to kill all of your opponents and dispense with the problem that way. So in the first ethical system, the notion is to create a rule of law system where people can get together and decide on the rules, and then try to enforce those rules. And if you don't like the rules, change the rules, but keep trying to enforce the law. You can say that war is politics by other means. So that sweeps war into the rule of law system in a sense. Genocide is not acceptable. And the goal is to build a lasting peace. Whereas in the second ethical system, you never surrender, you never compromise. War is a life or death struggle. Genocide may be necessary, and it is honorable because after all, you're preserving your people. And so the goal is to win wars. Now, when I first came across this, when I met Lefevre at a cybernetics conference, I thought this was quite fascinating. And over the years Lefevre, how long do you want me to go on about this? Okay, well, I can take questions at any time. There's a little story that Lefevre came up with to kind of illustrate the idea. Imagine you have a paper castle with paper people, and that castle is approached by a paper dragon. Well, this is not a normal castle, not a normal dragon, but as the dragon approaches the castle, the people in the castle say, "What do we do? This is a monster. You know, what are we going to do about this?" So they send out their hero, who attempts to establish communication with the dragon, which has a human face. Okay, it has a human face, but the dragon breathes fire. The hero is consumed, falls to the ground in ashes. End of story. But then the dragon goes on down the valley, goes over to another valley where people haven't seen what happened before. And once again, he approaches a castle, and the people inside are wondering, what are we going to do? How do we protect ourselves from this dragon? Well, they send out their hero with a sword and shield, ready to do battle with the dragon. And once again, the dragon breathes fire, the hero falls to the ground, etc. Now, the question is, in which castle would you prefer to live? In the first castle or the second castle? In the first castle, the hero tried to establish communication and failed. In the second castle, the hero tried to do battle with the monster and failed. But where would you prefer to live? Let's take a vote. Raise your hand. How many vote for the first castle? How many vote for the first castle? I see one hand. How many vote for the second castle?
I was for second.
Oh, okay. I got two of them. Everybody is abstaining. Okay, this is a social experiment. You know, you're supposed to participate here. Okay, well, so Lefevre's contention is that how you vote on this question is determined by whether you are using the first or the second ethical system. Or where it tells you where you would prefer to live, under which ethical system you would prefer to live. Any questions about this?
Well, I think that he emphasized the only difference is either using Boolean algebra addition or Boolean algebra multiplication, like the relation between 1 and 0. 1 plus 1 equals 1.
Okay, if you get into the mathematics, that's true. I should have, I guess, for this audience, I should have showed you some of the diagrams in the math and so forth. But there's a combination rule that my experience has been that you can understand the two ethical systems through that example of the dragon and the castle. You don't need to understand exponential mathematics. It's just the way he modeled it. But by modeling it in that way, Lefebvre was able to compute ethical status, guilt, and suffering in the two different ethical systems. So you have a different code of ethics, a different sense of guilt, a different sense of suffering in the two systems. And that's quite the case if you've become familiar with the United States and the Soviet Union as it existed before the end of the Cold War. There were dramatic differences on this. And
R has a question.
No, I was wondering whether we shouldn't maybe look at World War II as being different from the wars that followed it. In World War II, our ethical system was very definitely to win the war at all costs. And there was no hesitation about bombing civilians because everybody was doing it. Civilians, there were 60 million people who lost their lives, and the vast majority of them were civilians in World War II. And it was precisely by the absolute defeat of Japan and Germany that we were able to establish peace afterwards. So peace was made not through some sort of a gentle or more gentle ethical system. It was made through utterly defeating the enemy. And so I'm not sure that the difference in ethical systems is able to explain peace or not peace. What do you think about that?
I think it's a silly argument.
And also, Stuart, you mentioned that the theory helped both USSR and the US side. Can you tell us more about that? How exactly that happened?
Well, recently the theory was used during the breakup of the Soviet Union, because by that time Lefebvre had emigrated to the United States. Anatole Rappaport learned the theory, met Lefebvre, promoted it, introduced it to people in the White House and the Pentagon and so forth. And it was certainly being used in the Kremlin as well. So the theory was being used on both sides at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And they were doing this quite deliberately because they did not want a misunderstanding that could lead to a nuclear exchange. They didn't want any miscommunication, and there had been a long series of miscommunication. You see, the problem is if you believe in the confrontational and the importance of confrontation, then you can confront yourself and you evaluate your opponent if the opponent is confronting. If you think that compromise is admirable, then you seek compromise and you expect your opponent to compromise. JFK had this problem when he met with Khrushchev in Vienna soon after becoming president. And they were talking, and JFK was trying to, well, okay, you have a point, maybe, there's room for us to negotiate on that. And Khrushchev was being demanding and so forth. And after that meeting, Khrushchev decided he'd put missiles in Cuba. JFK came away knowing he's going to have to oppose Khrushchev's. And one of the things JFK did was he set up a psychoanalytic office in the CIA to do personality profiles of foreign leaders, because he came away from the meeting saying, I never met a man like that before. JFK was not able to establish rapport with Khrushchev. And then, so you can have quite serious misunderstandings if you're using these two different ethical systems, because you evaluate the other person. In other words, if you're assuming confrontation and the other person doesn't confront, you assume they're weak, they're unprincipled, they're not worthy. If you assume that people should be compromising in their attitude and the other person is confrontational, then you evaluate them as being unprincipled. And so each side attempts to present itself as a person of high ethical status, and each side conveys the image of a person of low ethical status. And then you've got yourself in a big difficulty. And that's where the theory helps. It helps you understand the other person's actions, ideally from their frame of reference. And I think once that set of ideas became widespread among officials and diplomats in the United States and Russia, they said, okay, what are we doing here? Let's try to get along. We were allies against the Germans. Why can't we get along now? And that idea hasn't spread throughout the diplomatic communities and the military communities, but I did see it in Sarajevo. I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina a few years after the war there. You may remember there was a lot of genocide. There was a lot of, it was very brutal wars, a continuation of the Baltic Wars. And during my talk, I was giving talks on organizational behavior, various psychological theories, and I presented a wide tableau of theories. And at the end of it, I said, of all the theories that I have presented, which did you find most interesting? And unanimously, they said Lefebvre's theory, which surprised me because I thought it described US-Soviet relations. And I said, well, why? What is it that you find interesting about that theory? And they said, well, first, it tells us why the war happened. And second, it tells us why the war is continuing, even though we're now supposedly being administered by the UN. So it's a very useful theory. And I'll give you one more example. You may remember the Iranian Revolution. And was it JFK, I think, was negotiating with the Iranians, or and Waldheim was, a former Austrian, was Secretary General of the United Nations. So Waldheim goes to Tehran. He tries to negotiate the release of the American diplomats that had been taken prisoner. And they have a negotiation. Waldheim comes out, confronts the press, and says things went well. Both sides are willing to negotiate, to compromise. Then they go in and they have lunch. They come out. Waldheim gets in his car, heads off to the airport. His car is surrounded by a mob. They're attacking the car. They want to kill him. So the question is, why do they want to kill Waldheim? All he said was that they were willing to compromise. Well, in the second ethical system, you can't be more insulting than that. What that means is you're not willing to stand up for your principles. You're willing to compromise your principles. And so Waldheim was lucky to get out of town alive. So these words mean something, and they mean different things in different locations. And this theory explains a lot. I had an example at a dinner party in Austria. I was talking with a Russian scholar, very capable, very fluent in English. And he wanted me to set up some conference or something. And he was leaning on me and pushing me and said, no, you're gonna need to do this. I said, well, actually I'm busy. I've got a lot on my mind. I don't really have time for that. He kept pushing at me and pushing at me. And finally I sat down on my plate and I said, look, there's some things I'm willing to do and there's some things I'm not willing to do. I'm willing to do this. I'm not willing to do that. And he says, oh, okay. So you got to push back, you got to draw a line in the sand and said this far and no farther. And I had been told that. And as I was having this conversation with him, I sort of stepped back a moment. I said, this isn't working. He's not getting the message. So let me try the other ethical system. So I became more confrontational, worked perfectly. So there's something there. It may be strange, but try it if you get into such a situation. Other questions?
Yeah, I wonder whether we might expand this a little bit. You have only two ethical systems. In fact, I would say there are three. The second one, for example, contains two sets of ethics. You say never compromise, but the Soviet Union was willing to compromise. And you say war is a life and death struggle, but the Soviet Union did not believe that. And in fact, it was precisely because the Soviet Union wanted to live that this mutual assured destruction policy actually worked. They didn't want to be destroyed. As for the goal is to win the wars, well, of course, that was our goal in World War II, without question. I think it might be more useful to look at this in terms of cost and benefits, that a country will make war if they believe that the costs are less than the benefits. I think this will explain why the Soviet Union was not willing to make an all-out nuclear war, because they wanted to live. Now, this is a combined, what you have as a second ethical system seems to combine something else. The third ethical system, which could be, for example, what is practiced in the Islamic Republic of Iran and by the various suicide bombers, they are in fact not willing to compromise, never surrender. And for them, war is a life and death struggle because they're assured of going to paradise if they lose. That would be their ethical system, which is non-compromise completely. So I think if we look at this more in terms of cost and benefits, it would be more productive. In the case of the Islamic Republic of Iran and all Islamic fundamentalists, for them, any material cost does not outweigh the benefits of going to paradise for eternity. For the communists, the costs do outweigh the benefits if you're talking about a major war, because they still want to live and they want to retain power. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very much the case, that these are two conceptual systems. You can become committed to one for a variety of reasons that you spelled out. You can become committed to the other, and you can be flexible and go back and forth to it. Now, take the United States and the institutions of the United States. The State Department sort of practices the first ethical system. Well, let's negotiate. And then if that doesn't work and you have to go to war, well, then we have the Pentagon and the military. So in a sense, both ethical systems are institutionalized, and people in both institutions can use both ethical systems. And this is true for other countries as well. You know, if you're in a war and things are going badly, you say, hey, you know, this isn't working out well. Maybe there's a way to get out of this. So they're not hard and fast, but depending upon how you were educated, you may think there's no alternative. So yeah, I agree. But I think that knowing the difference is helpful.
I would say that if you look at it in terms not of ethics, but in terms of costs and benefits, it might be more easy to understand. Because in World War II, we spared no ethics and no costs in order to win the war, because it was considered that losing the war would be more costly than whatever it costs to win it. And so I would tend to look at it not as an ethical system, but as a sense of cost and benefits.
I would compose here a counter argument to Carl. Carl, ethics is about the future. It's about what you might want to do under a given set of circumstances. It's not a decision to do something. It is as Stuart very clearly says, it's a conceptual system, but it's about the future and not the past. And it certainly is far vaster than the notion of economics or cost-benefit ratios or simple-minded calculi. This deals with what it means to be human and how you're going to live. And I think that's what Stuart's point is.
May I offer an in-between answer? What I hear, it's related to what Jason and I were talking about, is a line in the sand. And dus that is underlying your discussion. Dus there is a line, like you said in your conversation, that you're very clear, this is a line I'm not going to cross, this is what I want to do, this is what I don't want to do. But that is, I do not see very clearly how it's in one versus the other ethical system. However, and now we need to talk about the individual level. You have people that are fanatics, that draw the line, divide the universe in good and evil, and they will fight to the death. But you also can draw the line as solving a problem, and that's the cost and benefit approach that Carl is talking about. And so that the problem that we're dealing with is actually in the institutions, how many fanatics manage to become leaders and keep on forcing this black and white thinking, as opposed to does that you have people who kind of transition into thinking of it as a circle and a problem that needs to be solved, and so that they're very firm in terms of saying my people are important and don't mess with them, but they don't think of it as a good and evil problem. They just think of it as long as you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. So okay, so to conclude, I'm just adding as an underlying dimension, do you make a distinction as a line in the sand or more as a circle to solve a problem?
Circle. Okay. Let's